Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Dogs and Gooses. This is Starks. I will be your host today, otherwise known as the Silly Goose. And I am joined by Williams, otherwise known as the Dirty Dog.
No other way. No other way.
No other way to be known. Well, I mean, other than Silly Goose, but
of course, yeah.
we'll go into that later. Welcome back. It's been a long week, I know, since you've heard Williams' sweet, sweet voice.
I know that you all come for Starks, but I'm just, here on the side.
But I certainly hope that you took our advice last time and that you've been eating between episodes.
Yes.
Because otherwise, I'm going to be honest, you're probably not going to make it to episode 4.
So, and we really want you to.
Yeah. We support our viewers. We hope they're happy, and we hope they send us money. So, for all of you out there, please send me money. My Venmo is... Oh, no, Williams, don't cut that part out.
Oh, goodness.
Okay. Last week was a smashing success, as all of you would expect.
We every week's a
probably about 6.5 billion listens, I believe, right, Williams?
Or
was it 7.5?
In the neighborhood, probably.
Yeah, I guess we shouldn't brag too much about our numbers.
Yeah, never look at the numbers too closely.
Yeah. Williams, do you want to discuss our top 2 comments on the most annoying animal?
Yes, our top 2.
Yes.
Not our only 2.
No, certainly not.
From one listener, we have... They came in and commented, a fly. And I have to say that's a very annoying animal.
Yeah, that is a very annoying animal. I will say that might classify more as an insect.
Well, it depends. Are insects a subspecies of animals?
I don't believe so.
I don't know.
Well, no, I feel like it's a fair response. No criticisms to this listener. I'm just saying, in this competition between the two...
I happen to know this listener.
Do you? Well, hello, listener.
And the other listener had quite the funny comment. She said, "The Rat Master Splinter, let Shredder live his life."
Fair.
And,
So which of those 2 is the most annoying animal, in your view, Williams?
It's hard to say, because both of them are really annoying to me.
That's fair.
However, maybe we ought to go with the rat because it's more of a...
an animal?
Kind of, but also, you just think of a rat and you go... Because you have a fly in the house all the time.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, rats are pretty gnarly. Also,
now, I have known people who have pet rats, and not anything against them.
Also, I love that this one is the Rat Master Splinter.
He's
supposed to be the good guy.
Specifically, yeah. Let Shredder live his life. That was a beautiful response. And we appreciate both of you for responding. That means something to us.
Yep. Williams has been crying for the past 6 days over the amount of love that he feels from listener 1 and listener 2.
And you guys just commented yesterday. So, that's saying something.
You knew that they would respond preemptively.
I knew that someone would.
Okay, guys, it is time to talk about our sponsor, McNeats, located in McCammon, Idaho. Thank you guys for joining us, and golly gee, Williams, I do love me a McNeats cinnamon roll, don't you?
I can't eat cinnamon rolls, but if I could...
But you sure would.
I sure would.
Have you had any of Rose's food?
No, because...
Because it has gluten? It was at Shay's wedding.
I think I did have a little, yeah, of something.
Yeah, that darn gluten ailment you have.
I know, it gets me every time.
So, if any of you bajillions of people find yourself near McCammon, Idaho, be sure to hunt down McNeats, because it's a food trailer that Rose runs, and it is so freaking good. How did she sponsor us, you asked? Well, other than the millions of dollars she gave us, she also gives me yummy food every time I come to her house. So, that's your sponsor today for McNeats. All right, everyone, this is episode 3. And that means that pretty much every episode from here on out, we will have a guest. Ideally, yeah. There will be some where we do back to the old classic dog and goose. But as of right now, our plan is to get a lot of guests in the future.
And with our fame, that shouldn't be a problem.
Well, with our fame, we've had so many requests so far. It's ridiculous. Williams, since this is our last, probably not last. This is our last for the near future episode with just you and me. I thought, there are two options. I could play to Williams' strength for the topic, and I could try and
make a boring philosophy episode.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I also thought that I could do something random and talk about the history of rubber ducks. And then I thought, you know what? We won't have that many episodes to just have with Williams. And I was like, you know what? Let's do a boring philosophy episode.
I'm sorry, I guessed that right off the bat starts.
You did.
Didn't mean to just shoot you down.
You guessed it so well, though. That was so good. I was like, oh, dang. So today is, in fact, a boring philosophy episode. However, Williams' silky smooth voice will probably make it incredibly interesting for you guys. So if you want to stay, feel free to stay. If you'd like to go, no judgment here. Go to the future episodes where we talk about much cooler things than philosophy, like sports or business.
When I play to Stark Strengths.
Okay, Williams. Philosophy. Why did you choose philosophy as a major, Williams?
It was real tough. I almost didn't.
Yeah.
The story is that I was taking physiology and developmental biology over there at BYU.
Uh-huh.
Now it's known as cell. But it covers cell biology and things like that. I was really enjoying the courses. But after taking a few, because the plan was to go to medical school, I was thinking heavily about radiology.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, I don't know if this is something I want to do forever. It'd be cool because I'd be helping people a lot, but
you don't like helping people.
Well, you don't want to help them too much,
Williams is the type that if he sees an old lady at the top of the stairs and she's kind of struggling to go down, he'll go push her down the stairs.
Just give her a little shove
faster
to help out.
Yeah.
I don't want to be there the full time walking her down all the stairs.
Yeah.
I can give her the little push that she needs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Williams is just good like that. That lady saved so much time that day.
If my grandmother's listening, that was a joke.
Yeah. If my grandmother's listening, that was also a joke.
But and so I was like, I don't want to do this forever necessarily. And so I started talking to a lot of people who I trust and know me pretty well, from a variety of backgrounds, and they suggested a myriad of things, but philosophy was among them. And I happened to be reading a biography on Truman G. Madsen, who was a member of the 70 for our church. He was high up in his position later in his life, and he's no longer alive, but he was a philosophy professor at BYU. I was like, that's kind of interesting. I've always kind of had some deeper questions. I think we all do.
Yeah.
To a certain degree, and they would often occupy my mind and things, especially all growing up. And so I thought, maybe this philosophy thing is for me. I prayed about it quite thoroughly, and I feel good about doing it. And there have been times since where I'm like, this doesn't seem as lucrative as other things that I might equally enjoy, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But every time I go back and I pray and think about it again, I just feel like I'm on the right path if I'm doing what I need to be doing. And so I will say, I love my philosophy courses. Was I the best at it all? I'm nowhere near as good at philosophy, I think, as at least some of those kids in the class.
Yeah.
Because there are some sharp attacks. At least when it came to philosophy. I don't know about the other facets of their life. They're pretty good at the old philosophy.
None of them could have kept up with you with the custodial. That's for darn sure.
Not everyone can just
running circles around there.
Yeah. Name another philosophizing custodian out there.
Yeah. Yeah, but you can't. So, guys, that's the story of how Williams became a menace to society. No, actually, I am excited for when you become a professor someday, and all your students will be like, "Oh, you're that guy from the podcast."
Oh, our podcast is going to get huge. And then I won't even need to go to school for my PhD because they'll just offer us PhDs.
They'll just give us honorary ones.
Yeah.
Mine will probably be from Ole Miss. Is it Ole Miss? Because it's in Starkville. So
I think that's the one.
Starkville, Mississippi. That's where I'm going to get mine. Not wink, wink. If you're listening, people from Ole Miss.
You're definitely listening.
So basically, you were going to medical school because you were going to be a doctor.
Planning on going to medical school.
Planning on going to medical school. And then you thought, you know what? Philosophy's better.
I mean, am I wrong?
I wouldn't say so. Williams, who is your favorite philosopher?
Jesus. No, in terms of, your typical philosophers, that's kind of tough.
Uh-huh.
I would say, I enjoy several of them quite a bit. I like John Locke a lot. And it's not that I have a super deep knowledge of him, but there are certain points that I think you really were interesting and make me admire him some. Because he wasn't, by trade, he wasn't, a philosopher. I guess a lot of them weren't necessarily, but some of them definitely were and were a little heavier on. He was also a physician.
Yeah.
John Locke was. And so he was a smart guy. He goes to school, not even in philosophy or anything. You just go in there, learns how to treat people, etc. And then does philosophy too. So I think that's a very cool thing.
So what were some theories or things of his that were predominantly that he's known for?
One of the big things is he wrote this. Wrote several. He's famous for like 2 treatises on government.
That's what I was gonna say. Is I think he's related to like the free market government, isn't he?
Yeah, I want to say that. I think he says a little bit
the
about
free market system, not the free market government. My bad.
I don't remember as much about that, but I do, like, for example, the phrasing in Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness and the Declaration of Independence. He kind of came up with a precursor to that sort of phrase. It was life, liberty, and property.
Oh, so yeah, I've heard about that.
It's just a play off of John Locke.
Oh, cool.
And so I think that's really awesome from him. Another philosopher that I like a lot is good old Rene Descartes. I think probably because I covered him in like 3 of my classes.
Yeah.
I think one specifically devoted to him, and then the other 2 were more, I think, just general empiricist or continental rationalist courses.
Yeah. And
he was covered in it. We covered him and 2 other prominent figures, Leibniz and Spinoza.
So your favorite one is John Locke.
I like John Locke a lot.
And so his is more like political theory, human rights theory.
I would probably consider him more political than probably was anything
political
else.
Theory? Okay, that's fair. Okay.
I do have to say, I do like them, but I also love Stoicism, and so I'm a big fan of. And Marcus Aurelius's brand of Stoicism, I think, is a little different than the original one.
What is Stoicism? For our listeners, of course, not for me. I got you guys. Don't you worry.
Stoicism is this thought process. It's kind of a how to live philosophy.
Yeah.
And I think it fairly commonly misinterpreted because people are just like, he's stalwart,
Yeah.
so he must be stoic.
Yeah.
It kind of goes beyond that, although that is a kind of a core principle.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's a thought process of you cannot control anything outside of yourself.
Yeah.
So if things, do everything that you can within your power, like make your hold on life. However, there's no reason to be disappointed or discouraged
Yeah.
or anything else about anything outside of what you can do.
Yeah. I actually think that that's super important because I think in life, they've done studies, and there was a study that was done. I can't remember all the details of the study, but basically, when people start to feel hopeless or when they start to feel like there's no real chance in life, it's because they feel like it's no longer controllable. And so when life becomes no longer controllable, that's when you start to think, what's the purpose in even trying? Like, why would you continue or press forward? And it's not usually when something is hard. It's usually when they feel like it's impossible or when they can't, which makes a lot of sense. But I feel like that's such an important thing. In fact, Williams can see it, but you guys can't because we don't have camera. On my whiteboard, I have control what you can control. And it goes back to this idea of controlling your controllables. It's a phrase that I hear thrown around a lot. But it's basically like we're all trying to make it in life. We're all trying to become as famous as Starks and Williams are. And like we're all trying to get there to that next level of success. But I think a lot of times we get discouraged when things outside of our control are like making it impossible or hard or other such things. And so I think that's such a cool philosophy to just focus on controlling what you can control in your life, making sure that you're in a position to succeed when the opportunity comes calling, because opportunity will come calling at some point.
100%. I will also say that it's Stoicism, is in ancient Greece. I think it has its roots in ancient Greece, and it kind of went through Rome too a bit and stuff, but it seems as though a lot of religions kind of have and kind of continue to, in a way, admire and respect certain aspects of Stoicism.
Uh-huh.
And so I think that's really cool. I want to say, if I remember correctly, in our Bible dictionary that we have in our church, it kind of gives lists of different things in the Bible and a little description about each that mentions Stoicism. And
oh, really?
Kind of mentions it as kind of an honorable philosophy. So, yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. So, would that be your favorite like philosophical idea then, Stoicism?
It's got to be one of them.
It's got to be one of them. Okay. Okay, so this is the real meat of the conversation. This first part was just kind of introduction to Williams as a philosopher, all this stuff. So, I want to talk a little bit about today and like predominant ideas or ideals, and then your ideal like kind of system there.
Okay.
So, you and I have had this conversation in the past, and for those of you who weren't there, which is all of you, Williams and I talked about the predominant kind of rationale or thought in society today. And it seems to be, in Williams's words, if I'm quoting him correctly, individualistic hedonism. Is that correct? Like a form of that.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah. That seems to be our what we're shifting to.
Mm-hmm. So what is individualistic hedonism, Williams?
In my mind, or I think is how I meant it.
Mm-hmm.
Hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure and basing everything you do kind of around the pursuit of pleasure.
Uh-huh.
And individualistic, according to the individual. So what I want, what I think will bring me pleasure, or, will trump everything else about. It'll inform what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I don't care as much about. I mean, and it's not that it will definitely diverge with your interests.
Yeah.
However, I'm not considering your interests when I'm making decisions. I'm thinking about what will bring me the most pleasure.
Yeah. So, in a one sentence, dumbed down version, for those of us who didn't pass the 3rd grade.
I do what makes me feel good.
Yeah. So it's basically the seeking of like personal pleasure as the highest good, correct?
I would say so.
Okay. So, what do you feel like are issues that arise from individualistic hedonism in on a societal level?
Well, in a society, you want a sense of community, I think, and so it's difficult because I think there are some positives to individualistic hedonism
Absolutely.
to a certain degree, because I think everyone deserves to make choices to make them happy.
Absolutely.
However, I'd also like to mention the difference between pleasure and happiness.
That's true.
I think it was Epicurus who he's kind of one of the main people known for hedonism, but his was kind of a different brand. Actually, in some ways, it was interesting. I think it did a compare contrast once for a class. It was a long time ago, so I don't remember all the details. But I was taking a document, I think, of Epicurus and a document from, I think, Seneca. It was one of the Stoics. And they had some surprising similarities. But something about Epicurus's specific brand of hedonism, he took pleasure to mean kind of a higher pleasure.
Mm.
And so I want to say from a little what skim across the top, from a I guess a little glance at Epicurus himself and how he lived based on his idea of hedonism. I think he lived in a house with all of his friends,
Mm.
and they were just having a good time, but like a wholesome type of good time, it seemed.
Yeah.
And because he realized what would bring him the most pleasure is bringing other people pleasure, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so, if that's who you are, maybe hedonism isn't that bad.
Fair.
However, if you take pleasure in the misery of others,
Yeah.
you see some problems. And there's also, I mean, it's not just that straightforward.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also an
agreement.
issue you run into, like a little while ago there was people going around the area and they were stealing gas from people, and what they would do is they would drill a hole in the gas tank and then drain the gas out of people's vehicles. And to me, it's interesting because first off, crime is never okay, kids. But secondly, I feel like that's a double whammy because not only are they taking like all the gas, they're also costing these people like hundreds of dollars to repair their gas tank or replace their gas tank. And like through what you're talking about, is there's kind of an incentive to do that because for them, for the people getting the gas, that would not necessarily be wrong because they're doing things that are good for them, but not what's good for other people. And so it costs the other people far more than they were even gaining. And I don't necessarily think that that's what that philosophy stands for. Like, I don't think that the philosophy is like, do everything you can for yourself at the expense of everyone else, would be my guess.
But in individual hedonism, or individual hedonism, or whatever it is, it's not that that's ruled out either necessarily.
Yeah. I don't think there is a specific guideline. It probably depends on to what level you take the logos. Also, guys, this is obviously a little bit of a deeper podcast. If you just don't care, feel free to skip to other episodes. If not, feel free to join us for our discussion on modern thought.
I mean, no one would want to skip this episode.
Well, why would they? Also, I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the episode. I wanted to give a shout out to Anna Laura, or Lorgie, as being one of our very enthusiastic listeners.
And we appreciate her.
We do, and she is the sweetest. Anyway, back to philosophy. So Williams, with that, and I think that is the trouble that comes to it, because there's different like levels of thought to it, because there's something to be said of your first responsibility is to yourself, in terms of like if you're on a boat and it's sinking, like taking care of yourself so that nobody else has to take care of you. Because if everybody's trying to help everybody else, it can create an issue. And I guess more particularly with life, because like I feel like in many ways it's nobody else's responsibility but yours to make sure you're successful. And I think that could be kind of like along those lines of individualistic hedonism, where it's like, not necessarily that it is. Like I said, I think it depends on the spectrum that you go through for it. But it's your responsibility to make sure you're successful, that you have food, that you have a place to live, and that you have like this sort of stuff. And that, in a way, can ring of like taking care of yourself first, taking care of X and Y. Which I don't necessarily know that I would put forth as the best like logos or belief system, but I do think that I could see some merit in that.
Well, I mean, what you're saying, yeah, it's in a positive light, because I think everyone should have the capacity and ability to take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't know if taking care of yourself is as much looking for pleasure as it is avoiding pain, which you can kind of consider the same thing, but I think there's a very important difference between the two of those.
That's true.
I was listening to a psychologist not too long ago, and he is saying something about how I think he had done some studies or had researched some studies. It was in a video, but he said something about how people would, by and large, would rather avoid pain than seek pleasure, kind
really?
of thing.
That makes sense.
I mean, I get it. I think most of the time, most things I do, in terms of, being more responsible and stuff, I do kind of out of, to avoid pain.
Yeah.
Why do I pay my rent every month?
It's to avoid,
to avoid pain.
Yeah.
To, all these things. There are fewer things that I do to bring me joy, I think.
That's fair. I think also that can apply to a lot of things. Like for me, like I thought of immediately weightlifting. Because weightlifting, in many ways, can be enjoyable, but in probably more ways can be like pain and not enjoyable. And so like, I mean, you pretty much get done with the workout and you feel better. You like have expended some of your energy and your mood is improved and it stays improved usually for the day. I mean, obviously there are extenuating circumstances sometimes, but there is some pleasure involved, some joy that's involved. However, during the workout, there's a lot of pain. It's not very fun, particularly a lot of times. And there are moments where you like do something hard, you put up like more weight than you were expecting, or you are able to do more sit-ups or whatever your workout entails, and you're like really enjoying that because you did something unexpected and you made progress. But I would say generally, like if we're talking sheerly on the amount of time invested, you probably experience more pain, just for the amount of time. Now, long term, is it worth it? Absolutely.
And you'll experience a lot of pleasure from it, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, and it makes a difference in your daily life as well. So you may not go to the gym and think, golly gee, I'm so excited to do this workout that's going to kick my butt today.
But afterwards you feel fairly decent.
Yeah. And then later on when you're, doing whatever it is you do for fun, if you need to like go, like I play a lot of sports, and so when I can jump higher, run faster than I used to be able to, then I'm like, hey, this is like really nice, really enjoyable, really exciting type of thing. So I think that is kind of what I thought of when you're talking about, avoiding pain and feeling pleasure. And there's a definite difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, the point you brought up, that sometimes to seek pleasure, or at least higher pleasures, there's a certain amount of pain that you have to endure. So you can't really do everything based on avoiding pain. So that's kind of an interesting thought.
Well, and to me, so this is not a new analogy to me, so don't pretend that I'm intelligent or anything. But there's the analogy of rivers and water. And if you think about it, when rivers go places or when you pour water on a pile of sand, what the water does is it follows the path of least resistance. It has no real goal. It like gravity's pulling it downward and it just follows the path of least resistance. If there's somewhere that's easier, it goes that way. And I personally think it's important in our lives not to follow the path of least resistance. We want to follow the path that creates the most good for ourselves and hopefully for those around us as well. Because otherwise, if you're going down a path and it starts to get hard, even if it's leading to where you want it to go, you're going to turn and follow somewhere with less resistance. Now, obviously, there's a balance to it because you don't want to just bang your head into a wall over and over again just for fun. Like,
for no result.
Yeah, you don't do things just because they're hard. But if they have a purpose and they're hard, then you're willing to push through the hard for that. You don't avoid that pain.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very important. I have a hard time with that.
I think we all do.
I mean, yeah. It's hard too because you have to balance priorities.
Uh-huh.
You have to establish what exactly you want for one.
Uh-huh.
And for two, you can't have everything.
Yeah.
So you gotta say, I'm willing to, on this, I will kind of go down the path of least resistance and just kind of follow where it's going. But on this particular issue, I will continue to do the hard thing and push through to get to my end goal.
Yeah.
And so you got to kind of choose your battles because you can't push just through everything.
Yeah.
I've seen a few people who try and do that, and they are just miserable.
Yeah.
And they got so many irons in the fire, it's hard for them to just concentrate and actually bring closure to one of those things.
Yeah. Well, I also think there's something to be said for consistency.
Mm-hmm.
I have friends who, like, I've been going to college and I've been doing all these different things, and I think long term that my path will pay off for me. But I have friends who are much better off than I am financially or otherwise because what they did is they just picked one thing and they've just been at it for years. And so through those, like, investments over time, they've made a lot more progress than I have, like going to school and trying this job and trying that job and opening this business and yada yada yada. And like for me, I would hope that the experience I've gained over the last couple of years makes it so that when I do like finally hit that upswing, that it's an explosive upswing, and that's kind of what I'm banking on. But for them, they just created this steady path through steady years of improvement. And so I think that's to your point, is like if somebody just takes on things because they're hard, if you hit your head against the brick wall long enough, you'll probably get through if you don't like get some serious brain damage first. But like, could you have just walked around the brick wall, to your point? And so I think it's a healthy balance, and it all comes down to priorities. Also, I think it comes down to your personal logos, like what you believe is the highest good. And what you believe is a high good, at least, if not the highest good.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us around to individualistic hedonism again, and that idea. And so I think the highest good now, or I say by and large because this is definitely not the belief held by everyone.
Absolutely.
I think it's a belief that's always, I think, throughout history has had something to it.
Yeah.
But especially now when you really can be as alone as you want to be.
Uh-huh.
Even when you're in a huge group of people, you can still be isolated and alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
With, the advancements in technology, I really don't have to talk to anyone if I don't want to.
No.
I can message some people, do different things. I don't even have to go to the store to pick up my groceries anymore.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, when I was growing up, people still go to the store and meet people they see all the time.
Yeah.
I remember constantly at the store, we meet people. My dad would start talking to everyone because my dad just has that gift of gab,
Yeah.
And he'd be going, we'd sit there for 20 minutes, just talking to people that he maybe slightly recognized or
Yeah.
something to that effect, and that just builds community.
Yeah.
Um, creates relationships that, while they might not be deep necessarily, there's something there.
Yeah.
And if they ever see you in trouble or vice versa, they'd be more likely to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there would, yeah.
Well, and having people you can reach out to. Like, I'm a big believer in creating a strong community around yourself. I think that's very important, whether that be family, friends, all of the above, coworkers, like just creating a community around yourself. And, for you and I, we find a lot of that community in church, but if you don't find that in church, you should try and find it elsewhere, I think. Because, like, even yesterday, I had a friend spending the night over, and I don't have an air mattress, and it was kind of late. I didn't really want to run to the store, so I just reached out to another friend and asked him if he had an air mattress, and I went and borrowed it. And that's very simple, but it's very it's a kind of an example of what a community can do for you, because like it doesn't hurt him to borrow me his air mattress, and then I'll be doing things for him. And also in my family, I never had a AAA membership. I got one like a few months ago for a cross country road trip I was doing, but we never had like AAA because we had family that was scattered around, and I knew that at the drop of a hat I could call an uncle or an aunt or a cousin or my grandparents or my parents, and any one of them would have been willing to drive a couple hours or 4 hours or however long it really took to come and help me out. And I think that sense of community that is built is super vital for long-term emotional health. And so, like what you're talking to your point with the phones, I don't think phones and technology are inherently like terrible things.
No, of course not.
But what they do enable is for you to follow the path of least resistance to a point where you don't have that sense of community. You don't have those things that you realistically need to not just live but thrive.
I think that's accurate. And more to the point of declining sense of community in society. There used to be a time when, because now there's different kinds of government aid for people, down on their luck.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff happened, and it gets kind of messy. But before that, communities used to take care of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Your house burned down. We're gonna come by. You can stay with these different families until we help you build your house again.
Uh-huh.
And it was amazing what communities were doing. Towns, churches, etc. They are really taking care of their own. But now with some of these more government programs that kind of take care of people, but I think it gets a lot more complicated than it needs to be, maybe.
Yeah.
And it leads to different problems. But the community's no longer involved in helping.
Yeah.
Their community members.
Well, I think it goes down to, because if you distribute a large loss over a large number of people, then you can mitigate, like getting a new house is really expensive, but if you have a community of, like, let's say 1,000 people, and they distribute that loss amongst all of them, then it can come to the point, I mean, a house is kind of a big deal, but it can come to the point where it's not actually that big of a loss for everyone as a whole. And then you have this just kind of built-in safety net. And so I think to your point with government, I think that we've had some diminishing social, like, communities for a long time. And the government, and whether it's the cause of the effect, I don't know. I don't really want to get too into, like, the politics of it.
Yeah, I don't either.
Because either, like, maybe the social net deteriorated and then the government stepped in, or maybe the government stepped in and the social net deteriorated afterwards. But either way, like, it's kind of where we're at, and so I think that's a good point you make.
Just as I think it's the general trend of society.
Absolutely, yeah. So, Williams, I think that's a pretty good explanation of individualistic hedonism, and I think we've touched on this a little bit. What, in your opinion, and I don't think, first off, that this is necessarily like an absolute manual or anything. Like, I don't necessarily expect you to have the, like, correct answer, but this is based off of your belief system. Because we all...
it will be the correct answer.
It will be. Well, this
saying.
is your belief system, so you're right. Well, we talked about this just a little bit last week. People have their belief system that dictates what they do.
Correct.
And how they do it and what they prioritize in their life. For you, Williams, what would you say is the highest good?
That is a complicated question.
It's
but
a tough question, too.
I have an answer.
Ooh.
But it is kind of one that maybe isn't,
cut and dry.
I mean, it kind of is, but I've thought a lot about good and evil.
Uh-huh.
One of my favorite courses at BYU was religious philosophy and or philosophy of religion, where we talked about different arguments for and against religion through the ages.
Yeah.
And there's one anti-religious argument that gets a lot of time in the sun, and it's called the problem of evil.
Oh, yeah.
I think I talked to you
I think we've talked about it a little bit, yeah.
And I've talked to some different people about it, but essentially the argument comes down to approximately 3 points. One is God is omnipotent, in other words, all-powerful.
Uh-huh.
He's omniscient, meaning he's all-knowing, and yet evil exists in the world. Oh, sorry. 4 points. Because omniscient, omnipotent, wholly good.
Oh,
and
entirely
evil
good,
exists in the world.
Mm.
And the argument is that you can't have all those together. You have to let one of those 4 premises go.
That's fair. And that's when people talk about like bad things that happen in the world. That is kind of an allusion to that argument, correct?
Right. They're like, oh, this huge tragedy happened. All these people died.
Yeah.
Not any fault of their own necessarily. Or even if it is fault of their own, wouldn't God still stop it?
Yeah.
Kind of an idea. I've thought a lot about it and approached the problem many different ways. I think one of the issues that I've discovered with that argument is you have to look at the biblical definitions of good and evil.
Interesting.
Because I went through one day, and not that I explored all the passages in depth necessarily.
Yeah.
But we have this handy tool in our church. It's called the Topical Guide, where you can look up a word or maybe even a small phrase.
Yeah.
2-word phrase. And you can see several different times where it's mentioned in different books of the Bible and in our other books of Scripture. But you look at the Bible specifically, even the Old Testament and the New Testament, and I specifically looked at the Old Testament too, because I think it's kind of oft forgotten, but it's very important. I think it lays some of the foundation too.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see different aspects of God in it than I think the New Testament always covers.
Yeah.
Every time they mention good, it's never, and so-and-so was feeling really good.
Mm-hmm.
The prophet Isaac, think life was just easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Things are just going his way. It's good. Never was it mentioned like that. Every time they talked about good, they were talking about they're doing the will of God.
Interesting.
And every time they're like, and this is evil.
Yeah.
It was always something against what God was wanting.
Interesting. So, for more secular people, how would you define that?
I don't know if it can kind of translate to the secular
That's true.
world in terms of different ideas of God. Maybe if you don't believe in God necessarily, you have some sort of
moral compass.
Right.
Which I think everyone does. They have some sort of moral compass or something like that.
And so, yeah. But the way I look at it, as a religious individual, is that the will of God is good. Now, our religion's view of that I think is a little bit more nuanced than, I'm not going to say all others, because I think others have a very good grasp on this too. But in some of my ethical philosophy courses, we talked about different ethical systems.
Hmm.
And the idea with ethical systems is you have, you kind of have an idea of what is the highest good, and you build it around that.
Okay.
And they're always very strict, and there's no leeway, and that often gets them into a lot of their troubles, a lot of their problems. And there's a couple of religious ethical systems in place where they say, I do this, that, and the other because God commanded it, and so they kind of look to God as the highest good. But I don't necessarily think divine command theory is one of the most popular ones.
Uh-huh.
It's God states this, this, and that in the scripture, and we follow that. And I think yes, by and large. However, there are times scriptures say don't lie, and I can think of several times in which lying, or at least omission of the truth, can kind of be a good.
Hmm. So, is your point
things like that
it can be situational? Is that what I'm hearing?
A little bit more so.
But not entirely.
Completely.
Yeah, well, obviously, if your definition of the highest good is completely subjective or up for interpretation, then you don't have a very stable moral system. But you're saying that more important than the actual blanket statement is the interest or motivation behind the action. Yes?
Right. Sort of. So, I think what's important to remember is that the scriptures talk about the Holy Ghost. And I like the description, I think it's in John John 3, where Nicodemus comes to talk to Jesus in the New Testament. And Jesus talks about the Spirit, compares it to the wind.
Yeah.
The wind bloweth where it listeth. The Spirit will guide you the right direction.
Yeah.
I think. And
which
different religions kind of have a different.
There's different phraseology for it, even within the secular world. So, like to your point, what you're saying is that you can discern good from evil through the Spirit, which the more secular opinion of that would be a conscious, like your.
I would probably say so.
Yeah, your distinction between good and evil, and the way that you know that would be the Spirit. To your point.
Correct. I don't know necessarily how well this translates either, because I think.
Well, I think it's hard
seeking
because
the Spirit and knowing what the Spirit feels like is also important.
Yeah, and I think it's different. I just I'm just trying to translate a little bit.
Of course,
between different
different
ideologies and different things.
So I guess to kind of complete the idea is. You look at Galatians 5:22-23, talks about what the fruits of the Spirit are.
Uh-huh.
If you have, I'm not saying that you don't need to go every decision you make like, but look at this nuance or that nuance. But if there's a especially complicated situation,
uh-huh.
I think in our religion, what I would do is pray about it. And I would think heavily about it, kind of make a decision, and then if one of the fruits of this, or if I get the fruits of the Spirit,
yeah,
make me feel or
help you know what to do. Yeah,
help me know what to do. Then I can follow that.
Yeah.
And there's this.
So
go ahead.
Real quick, I was just gonna say. So we talked about like a specific type of a specific theory of thought. So, do you have? This is more for the purpose of the episode, not necessarily like. Obviously, there's a lot of discussions we could have about religious things and different things, and I think that that's super good. But I mean, like, do you have like a specific logos that you think is the most correct? In terms of like, because we talked about like individualistic hedonism.
Mm-hmm. Do I have a name to it?
Yeah, do you have a name to it? Because we don't want to.
Because
I feel like this sort of thing is easy. It can be easy to get lost in the weeds.
Correct.
Which is fine, if you and I are having a conversation, but I want it to be somewhat readable for our listeners.
Of course. I don't know if this necessarily has maybe the closest thing would be divine command theory, kind of.
Mm.
But I think any normative system that you put that you try and compare to this would make it a little too strict for what I'm thinking. Because I would like to show a divergence between from this thing that I'm saying and a very strict ethical theory.
Yeah. Okay. I think I like that.
So it's a kind of a play off of divine command theory in terms of I think you should follow the biblical word, etc. Because I think that God is the highest good.
Mm-hmm.
God's will is the highest good. And so I'm basing everything I do off that. And so a lot of that's going to come down to following what the scriptural teachings are and the morals contained therein.
I think that's fair. Okay.
I'm just adding the nuance of it's not going to be
it's not black
every
and white.
specific situation, correct?
Yeah.
And there's a certain point where you got to figure things out with divine help.
Yeah, well, to our personal logos, that was kind of like
it makes more sense
religion wise. That's ours
others.
because like the law of Moses and the Old Testament type stuff was all like very much don't do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, do this, do this, don't do this.
However,
like very much laid out. And we still have some of those things, but you know, for us, Jesus came, he fulfilled that law, and he said instead, what is the purpose behind this law? How can you live that purpose instead of just doing like these checkbox things?
Right.
I
would like to mention one scriptural scenario, a biblical scenario. Abraham, when he had to go to Egypt, I believe it was. You're not supposed to lie necessarily. It's not necessarily that he did, but God told him, when you go to Egypt, don't say your wife is Sarah is your wife.
Say she's your sister.
Say she's your sister.
Yeah.
Which is kind of odd, because it is misleading. I mean...
Well, they said that if they'd known that it was his wife, that they would have killed him.
Correct. And so, what was the highest good? God's will.
Yeah. And... Go ahead.
And it wasn't necessarily cut and dry what he should do in that scenario.
And I think
because you think, the right thing to do is not lie. Just say that she's your wife. Or maybe just don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
But that comes with some problems.
I think you're right. I think, so for me...
A little bit before the law of Moses. But...
Oh, you're good. I was just going to say, for me, I think you're completely right. Like there are things that can be situational, like you're saying. Like
there's nuance.
There's nuance to everything. So, one thing that I feel like for me to kind of throw this question at myself, I personally think, I mean, more like along the lines of what I feel like the highest good is outside of, like, kind of your point, because I would pretty much agree with you philosophically on all that. But for me, I think that I would say that the community, which we talked about a little bit earlier, is a huge part of it. Because the problem that I see with individualistic hedonism is if you believe that the highest good is to seek your own pleasure and happiness, if you will. I mean, obviously there's a difference between pleasure and happiness, but if your highest good is to seek for yourself the greatest thing, and then you just expect everyone else to do the same thing, I think, like, how do you have anybody that would die for their country in war? How do you have anybody that would, sacrifice for their family? That means that if you're, like, on the Titanic and it's sinking, then all of the strongest, like, most, athletic people would have been the ones on the boats. Because they would have pretty much, like, just dominated everything to the point where they would have gone on there. And you wind up in this sort of tribal, like, thing where the strongest people become surrounded by other people who want to curry favor from them, so the strongest people will protect them, and so on and so on. And I think that that's kind of what it degenerates into. So for me, I think seeking personal happiness and fulfillment is a high good, but it's not the highest good. So you like I don't know if I necessarily could rank them off the top of my head, but you essentially have a system of probably the highest good is that of my community. And my community can range from your family to your city to your state to your country to like your religion, whatever your community is.
Would you say that the closer you can have that community, like would you favor family over the city, or the city over the state?
I think so. I think in my personal eyes, I would say perhaps now if you're looking out about city over like country, then I feel like that gets a little bit dicey. Yeah, well, because the city doesn't have the capacity to like protect me from other countries, type of thing. And so, like, if they're at odds, I might choose the country's side. Also, it depends on what the issues are. Then I might just choose whichever one. But I would say the highest community that you should be willing to sacrifice for is for your family. So you have your family, and and also recognizing that within your community, there are other people's communities as well, and having some care for them. Obviously, they don't take the highest priority. But, like, for example, like on the Titanic, they put the women and the children on the lifeboats. And some of the men survived, but not a lot of them, as I understand it. And so basically that's to recognize, like, that inside my community, I want to make sure, obviously I'm not married, I don't have kids, but inside my community, I want to make sure that my wife and children would be safe, and then it comes to me, and so on and so on. And then in that regards, you're civil and you respect the desires of somebody else to make sure their wife and children are safe, and so on and so on and so on. And so then within that community, if there is an active threat to my country or to my city or to my state, then I am willing to place that above my own interests in personal fulfillment. And when you get those two things skewed, I think it creates a lot of issues. And so, like I said, seeking my personal happiness is very important, and it is a good. It's a high good, but it's not the highest good. And that would be my issue with individualistic hedonism, because I feel like it is very detrimental to society. And I don't necessarily believe in, I don't know, you probably know the philosopher, but he said that the best course of action was that which would create the most good. I think that is a good course of action. I don't know that is the best course of action, because that can deteriorate into many arguments that you could like make a few people's lives miserable and then everyone else live great. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think I kind of fall along the lines of kind of an individualistic sort of thing where you are responsible for yourself, but also you have responsibility to other things that are higher than even your responsibility to yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very good, and it's kind of the reason where I kind of choose the will of God as the highest good, because I believe it kind of covers those things.
Yeah.
In important ways, because I mean the gospel is a lot about you becoming. I think a lot of churches preach this, become self-sufficient.
Yeah.
But also, be willing to help your brother in need.
Yeah.
And to do all these things. And so it's both an individualistic and communalistic thing.
That's fair.
But I think to your point, I think you were thinking about utilitarianism.
Is that what that is?
John
I don't
Stuart
know.
Mill. His idea was we're going to do what produces the most pleasure for the most people.
Oh, yeah.
Was his general idea. And so, yeah, and that does can make you do some really wacky things.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like the gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet theory in my eyes.
I mean, yeah, there are sacrifices that I think you have to make for certain things, but
Mm-hmm.
the most pleasure for the most people, I do question. I think that's also covered in the idea of following the will of God in a way.
Yeah.
But I can see where people with more of a secular bent would have some issue with that. But also, maybe they won't necessarily, because different people's idea of God is a little different.
Mm.
And
well, I think
I don't know.
I think that, like you say, everybody has kind of a different idea, but I think everyone has some form of moral system, which is why I kind of like to translate it, where we're actually talking to other people who aren't here.
I don't think any of them are as rigid as any particular theory.
Yes, no, I agree, and I think it varies, but that would be. That's why I like to break down a little bit of the logos, but I definitely agree with you. Okay, Williams, we are coming to the close of our episode. Do you have anything about philosophy that you are dying to say that you have to get off your chest?
That I have to get off my chest?
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't know. I think we covered a lot of fun things.
We did. I hope. Let's see. I hope this episode was fun for everybody. I personally really enjoyed deep conversations and talking about logos and all that stuff. But I don't know if everyone does.
It may not be for everyone, but that's why there's always next week's episode.
You bet your bottom dollar.
Yeah, and so philosophy is lots of fun. I would recommend. It's not as difficult of a thing as maybe we made it sound, or as most people make it sound. I think a lot of it comes down to terms, and
absolutely.
We may have used some more. I don't think we used anything too complex necessarily.
I don't think you used anything too crazy, but listen to it a couple times if you didn't understand.
Yeah, I mean, also there are just some good books out there.
Yeah. I don't necessarily. I'm not a philosophy major like you, so I don't necessarily feel like I don't necessarily feel like that you need to have like a super deep understanding of everything, but I do think that everyone should have a basic understanding of their own belief system. Mm-hmm. And we touched on that last week a little bit in the middle of the episode, but that is kind of my take. So I think everyone should have at least enough understanding of philosophy to understand different belief systems, their belief system, and to be able to interpret other people's belief systems so that they can interact with people in a way that's positive for both people.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I'd say a lot of the philosophical texts are free. You can find them in different places.
Some of them do get a little bit wordy, though, for laymen. I remember my philosophy class. I definitely, when I read the book sometimes, I would get a little lost. But if we were discussing it, I was able to understand things very clearly. Because the concepts I picked up on really well, but the wording sometimes got a little bit much.
Well, yeah, and they were writing, and they had a lot of philosophers wrote horribly.
Mm.
So, and it wasn't this. There are some philosophers who are very much, this is for philosophers, philosophy is this high thing. We don't necessarily want some other people getting into it like we are.
They kind of tried to keep it a little bit, yeah.
But a lot of them weren't that way.
Yeah.
There are certain philosophers that you kind of got to watch out for. It's just going to be over everyone's heads, over my head even, what they're trying to do.
Is there kind of a goofy philosophical theory that you want to leave our listeners with?
A goofy one?
Yeah.
I can think of a couple dark ones.
Maybe we'll stay away from those.
Yeah, I'm trying to... A general goofy established philosophical idea.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but like something someone presented or whatever that was wild.
I don't know about the philosophical idea, but do you know where the dunce cap came from?
I don't.
It was actually from a philosopher. His name was Duns Scotus, but I think it was spelled, if I remember correctly, D-U-N-S.
Oh, really?
So Duns and then Scotus. And so he wore this hat on his head that was cylindrical. It was a cone shape.
It was a cone shape.
And the idea behind that was, I'm kind of siphoning the wisdom from heaven. I want to say I think he was a Catholic philosopher.
Yeah?
Or he was some religious philosopher guy.
Does he know heaven's supposed to be above you? So you should have the pointy end on top
He's getting it from heaven into his head.
It's like an antenna.
Well, kind of a point,
Yeah.
I don't know. That was kind of the idea. I'm getting wisdom from heaven. So he wore that, and then all of his philosophical followers wore it. But, over time...
It became kind of a joke.
it became more of a joke because a lot of the philosophers after him were a little bit more like, oh, I'm so and so, I'm so important, I'm a follower of Duns Scotus, and so they'd make fun of him, and they called it the dunce cap.
That's funny. I think I'm gonna start a movement where you wear a hat, but the point is on your head and then it widens out as it goes upward.
It'd have to be.
It would have to be very well balanced. Maybe a chin strap on it. Because to me that makes way more sense. Wisdom is coming in. I'm catching more wisdom because there's a bigger surface area.
You don't want to bonk your head on something because if you do, you're driving that.
Williams, I make a lot of sacrifices for wisdom. You know that?
For the appearance of wisdom.
No, Williams. This is real wisdom. Don't you know that like thoughts rain down from heaven, and if you have a bigger surface area to catch them, the smarter you are.
You have to have a
fun fact for you. That's why everyone assumes if you have a big brain that you're intelligent, because then you have more surface area in your head. That's why Peyton Manning's forehead is so big. Do you have anything to add?
No, I just am not that much of a sports guy. So, I mean, I have seen Peyton Manning in a couple of commercials.
He has a big forehead, doesn't he?
The hatred is merited.
No hatred.
No hatred. Just making a
Peyton
comment.
Manning is responsible for the Broncos' most recent Super Bowl. Okay. Thank you, Peyton.
He appreciates the size of your forehead, apparently.
I do. So, anyway, that's it for us today. Really excited to have our first guest next week. So definitely
stay tuned.
Well, back to our motto. Thanks for joining us today, guys. Listen if you want, or don't. We don't care.
Thanks, guys.